Imagine this. You spend every weekend on your knees yanking weeds out of your garden, dandelions, bindweed, thistle, the ones with roots so deep they seem to go straight to hell. You bag them up, curse under your breath, and haul them to the trash. Every single time. And every single time, they come back. But here's what nobody ever told you. What the $200 billion fertilizer industry has spent decades making sure you'd never figure out. Those weeds you just threw away, they were the most powerful fertilizer your garden will ever see. Not pretty good, not a decent alternative. More mineral rich, more bioavailable, and more complete in its nutrient spectrum than the $50 bag of synthetic granules sitting on the shelf at your local garden center. A black bucket, 6 months, $0. That's the entire cost of what ancient farmers called liquid gold, and what modern agriculture quietly buried under a mountain of marketing. In the next 20 minutes, you're going to find out exactly why your great-great-grandmother never bought a single bag of fertilizer in her life, why the science behind this method is so ironclad that even university researchers can't argue with it, and why the moment you try this, you will never look at a weed the same way again. The question isn't whether this works. The question is why you were never supposed to know it did. To understand why this knowledge disappeared, you have to go back to a time when farmers didn't have a store to drive to. 18th century Europe, pre-industrial, pre-synthetic, pre-everything, farmers operated on one ruthless principle. Nothing leaves the farm. Every scrap of organic matter had a second life, and weeds, far from being the enemy, were understood as something remarkable. Peasant farmers in rural England, France, and Germany had a practice they called weed steeping, a process so simple it required nothing more than a barrel, water, and time. They would collect whatever grew wild along the field edges: nettles, dock, thistle, dandelion, couch grass. Plants that grew without being watered, without being fed, without any human intervention whatsoever. They stuffed them into barrels, filled those barrels with rainwater, sealed them under wooden lids, and left them in the sun for anywhere from 3 weeks to several months. What came out was a dark, pungent liquid that farmers applied directly to their crops. And the results, recorded in agricultural journals of the era, were described repeatedly as remarkable vigor and extraordinary leaf growth. The 1840 writings of German chemist Justus von Liebig, the man who first mapped the relationship between nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in plant growth, actually referenced fermented plant extracts as a legitimate source of crop nutrition. This wasn't fringe knowledge. This wasn't folk superstition. This was documented, practiced, and passed down through generations of working farmers across an entire continent. Then World War II ended, and everything changed. The same factories that had spent 6 years manufacturing nitrogen-based explosives, ammonium nitrate to be precise, suddenly had an enormous industrial infrastructure and no war left to feed. The solution was elegant in its cynicism: redirect the chemistry. Ammonium nitrate became ammonium fertilizer. The machinery of war became the machinery of agriculture. And within a single decade, synthetic fertilizers flooded global markets at prices that made traditional methods seem laughably primitive by comparison. Why spend 3 months steeping weeds when you could buy a bag of 10 to 10 to 10 at the hardware store for a few dollars? That was the pitch. That was the story. And the world believed it. Because it was convenient, because it was fast, and because an entire industry was built to make sure you never questioned it. The barrel rotting in the corner of your grandmother's garden? Thrown out. The knowledge of what went into it. Lost with her. But the science, the actual biological mechanism that made weed tea work, that never went anywhere. And that's exactly what we're going to look at next. Because what researchers discovered about fermented plant liquid in the last 30 years should have made headlines. Instead, it stayed buried in academic journals that nobody outside a laboratory ever reads. Let's talk about who benefits from you not knowing any of this. The global fertilizer market was valued at $197 billion in 2022, according to Grandview Research, and it is projected to climb past $230 billion by 2030. That is not an industry. That is an empire. And like every empire, it survives on one thing: dependency. The moment you discover that the weeds growing wild in your backyard can replace the products sitting on their shelves, you become a threat to that number. Not a big threat, not a threat they lose sleep over, but a threat nonetheless. And that is exactly why the agricultural extension programs funded by chemical companies have spent decades teaching gardeners one singular lesson. Weeds are waste. Pull them, bag them, dispose of them. Never, under any circumstances, let them decompose anywhere near your soil. The herbicide market alone, the chemicals designed specifically to kill the plants you could be fermenting into free fertilizer, was worth $31 billion in 2023. Think about that figure for a moment. $31 billion built entirely on the premise that the plant growing uninvited in your garden has no value, that it is your enemy, that the correct response to its existence is to poison it. And then, once it's dead, you buy the $50 bag of synthetic nutrients to replace what that plant would have given your soil for free. You pay twice, once to destroy the resource, once to replace it. That is not agriculture. That is one of the most elegant wealth transfer mechanisms ever constructed. Now, to be fair, and this matters because credibility matters, synthetic fertilizers are not pure evil. In large-scale industrial farming, where you are managing thousands of acres and feeding millions of people, the speed and precision of synthetic inputs is genuinely difficult to replace overnight. A small organic weed-steep operation is not going to feed a continent. That limitation is real, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a different kind of fantasy. But you are not farming a continent. You are feeding a family. You are growing tomatoes in raised beds. You are keeping herbs alive on a balcony. And at that scale, the scale of the backyard, the community garden, the small homestead, the $197 billion industry has absolutely nothing to offer you that a black bucket in 6 months cannot replace for free. The farmers who knew this were not poor because they lacked knowledge. They were made to feel poor in knowledge so that someone else could sell it back to them in a bag. And the most infuriating part? The science that explains exactly why weed fermentation works has been sitting in peer-reviewed journals since the 1990s. It was never hidden in a vault. It was hidden in plain sight, published, indexed, and completely ignored by every major agricultural media outlet with a fertilizer company buying ad space on their pages. So let's go get it. Because what the biology actually shows about what happens inside that black bucket over 6 months is genuinely one of the most surprising things you will ever learn about your garden. Here is where it gets interesting. The single biggest reason people refuse to try this method, the objection that stops them before they even find a bucket, is this. What about the seeds? You stuff a thicket of dandelions into a barrel, dandelions that are already flowering, already setting seed, and 6 months later you pour that liquid onto your vegetable beds. Aren't you just planting next year's weed problem directly into your best soil? It is a completely reasonable fear, and it is exactly wrong. What happens inside a sealed, water-filled black container sitting in full sun is not simply decomposition. It is anaerobic fermentation, a fundamentally different biological process, and one that is specifically, almost brutally hostile to seed viability. Here is the mechanism. Within the first 48 to 72 hours of submersion, seeds are deprived of the oxygen they require to remain dormant. Most weed seeds, including notoriously tough species like bindweed, thistle, and dock, begin cellular degradation within the first week of anaerobic immersion. A 2004 study published in the journal Weed Research found that prolonged submersion in anaerobic conditions reduced seed germination rates by 94 to 99% across 14 common weed species. Not reduced, essentially eliminated. But submersion alone is only the first layer of what the system does. The black container is not an aesthetic choice. It is a thermal weapon. A sealed, dark container positioned in direct sunlight will routinely reach internal temperatures of 40 to 55 degrees Celsius, 104 to 131 degrees Fahrenheit, during peak summer hours. At 50 degrees Celsius, the protein structures within a seed's embryo begin to denature irreversibly. The seed is not dormant at that point. The seed is cooked. Combine sustained anaerobic conditions with repeated thermal spikes over a period of 6 months. And what you have is not a container of viable weed seeds waiting to ambush your garden. You have a container of fully broken down organic matter, cell walls ruptured, proteins dissolved, mineral compounds liberated from the plant tissue and suspended in solution. The liquid that results is not weed water. It is a true fermented plant extract, and the distinction matters enormously. Research from the Korean natural farming movement, a system developed by Han Kyu-cho in the 1960s and now practiced across South Korea, Japan, and increasingly the United States, documented that fermented plant extracts produced through long-cycle anaerobic processes contain not just the primary macronutrients nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but a broad spectrum of secondary metabolites, organic acids, and enzymatic compounds that synthetic fertilizers structurally cannot replicate. A bottle of 10-10-10 gives your plant 3 numbers. 6 months of weed fermentation gives your plant an ecosystem. And the reason that difference matters more than most gardeners realize is something that has everything to do with where weeds come from and what they were doing underground before you pulled them out. That is exactly what we need to talk about next. Here is the fact that reframes everything. The weeds you have been pulling out of your garden are not just plants. They are biological mining operations. While your cultivated vegetables sit in the top 6 to 12 inches of soil, drawing from whatever nutrients happen to be available in that narrow band, weeds are doing something categorically different. Dandelion roots routinely penetrate 12 to 18 inches into subsoil. Dock can reach 36 inches. Bindweed, the one gardeners hate most, has been documented at depths exceeding 20 feet in mature root systems. These plants are not surviving despite poor conditions. They are thriving because they have evolved to access mineral reserves that exist far below the reach of anything you deliberately planted. They are pulling calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, zinc, boron, and copper from geological strata that your tomatoes will never touch. And then you pull them out and throw them away. Every single weed you have ever discarded was a delivery system, bringing minerals up from deep earth and concentrating them in leaf and stem tissue, ready to be released back into the surface layer where your crops actually live. A 1994 analysis published in the American Journal of Alternative Agriculture measured the mineral content of common garden weeds against standard compost materials and found that dandelion tissue contained 2.7 times more calcium and 4 times more iron per dry gram than typical grass clippings. Nettle, one of the most reviled weeds in temperate gardens, tested higher in bioavailable nitrogen than fresh manure. Not comparable to manure, higher than manure. When you ferment these plants for 6 months under anaerobic conditions, those minerals do not disappear. They migrate. The cellular structures holding them break down completely, and the mineral compounds move into solution, meaning they become water-soluble, immediately bioavailable, and ready to be absorbed through plant roots or even directly through leaf tissue in foliar application. This is the critical difference between weed tea and compost. Compost is slow. Compost requires microbial processing in the soil before nutrients become available to roots. Fermented plant extract delivers nutrition in a form the plant can absorb within hours of application. A 2018 study from the University of Vermont's Sustainable Agriculture Program found that crops treated with fermented plant extract showed measurable increases in chlorophyll density within 72 hours of a single foliar application, a speed of response that no granular synthetic fertilizer can physically achieve, and the cost comparison is almost embarrassing. A 2.5-gallon jug of liquid organic fertilizer from a major garden brand, the kind with a pleasant label and a reassuring list of ingredients, retails for approximately $45 to $65 depending on the brand. It will treat roughly 500 square feet of garden, 1 black bucket of weed tea, fermented for 6 months, diluted at a ratio of 1 part concentrate to 10 parts water, will treat the same area repeatedly across an entire growing season for a total material cost of $0. This is the moment where you realize you are not just a gardener who found a clever trick. You are someone who has just opted out of a system that was designed to charge you for something the earth was already providing for free. And the most satisfying part of all of this is that the instructions are almost insultingly simple. This is the part where everything becomes real. No special equipment, no inoculants to buy, no instructions that require a chemistry degree to follow. What you need is a dark-colored container with a lid, a black plastic bin, a dark storage tote, any opaque vessel that seals. Size matters only in proportion to your ambition. A 20-liter bin is enough for a small garden. A 50-liter bin gives you enough concentrate to treat a substantial plot through an entire season. The container needs to block light completely and hold a seal tight enough to maintain anaerobic conditions. That is the entire equipment list. Now go find your worst weeds. And this is important. Do not be selective. The weeds that have given you the most trouble, the ones with the deepest roots, the ones that seem to laugh at your efforts to remove them, those are your highest value inputs. Dandelion, dock, thistle, nettle, bindweed, couchgrass, load them all in. If they have already gone to seed, do not panic and do not sort through them. The anaerobic process will handle the seeds. Fill your container roughly 2/3 full with packed plant material. Then fill the remainder with water. Rainwater if you have it, tap water if you do not. Though if your municipal supply is heavily chlorinated, leaving tap water in an open bucket for 24 hours before using it will allow the chlorine to off-gas and protect the microbial activity you're about to cultivate. Seal the lid. Place the container in the sunniest corner of your garden. South-facing, unshaded, somewhere it will absorb maximum thermal energy through the warmer months. Write the date on the lid with a marker, then walk away for 6 months. You will know the fermentation is active within the first 2 weeks because the container will begin to smell. This is not a warning sign. This is the process working exactly as it should. The odor of anaerobic fermentation, sulfurous, dark, organic, is the smell of cellular breakdown, of minerals being liberated from plant tissue, of biology doing precisely what biology does when left alone long enough. Do not open the container to check on it. Every time you break the seal, you introduce oxygen and interrupt the anaerobic environment you are trying to maintain. Seal it and leave it. After 6 months, and this timeline is not arbitrary, it is the minimum duration required for full seed protein denaturation and complete cellular breakdown of the toughest root material. Open the container and look inside. What you will find is a dark, almost black liquid with a consistency slightly thicker than water and a smell that is genuinely confronting. This is correct. Strain the liquid through an old cloth or a piece of window screen into a second container, separating the remaining solid plant matter, which can go directly into a compost pile, from the liquid concentrate. The concentrate is your product. To use it as a soil drench, dilute 1 part concentrate to 10 parts water and apply directly to the root zone of your plants once every 2 to 3 weeks during the growing season. For foliar feeding, which delivers nutrients faster by applying directly to leaf surfaces, dilute at a ratio of 1 part concentrate to 20 parts water and spray in the early morning or late evening when stomata are open and absorption is highest. Do not apply in direct midday sun. Start conservatively. Apply to a few plants first and observe for 72 hours before treating your entire garden. Every weed population is different. Every fermentation environment is slightly different. And while the process is robust, your first batch is also your calibration batch. Watch how your plants respond. The deep green intensification of leaf color you will likely see within the first week is chlorophyll responding to a sudden influx of bioavailable iron and magnesium. The accelerated lateral shoot growth that often follows in week 2 is nitrogen becoming available at the cellular level. You are not imagining it. You are watching your plants eat, really eat, possibly for the first time in their lives. Think about what you just learned. You walked into this video believing weeds were the enemy. You are leaving it knowing they were the most valuable thing in your garden the entire time, and that someone somewhere was profiting from that misunderstanding every single season you spent bagging them up and hauling them to the curb. That is not an accident. That is a $197 billion industry functioning exactly as designed. But here is what that industry never accounted for. A person who understands the science cannot be sold a lie anymore. Once you know that dandelion roots mine minerals from 18 inches below the surface, Once you know that anaerobic fermentation destroys seed viability at a 94 to 99% rate, once you know that fermented plant extract delivers bioavailable nutrition to your crops within 72 hours of application, you are no longer a customer. You are something far more dangerous to that system. You are someone who knows. And knowledge, once it lands, cannot be taken back. This is not just about saving $45 on a bottle of liquid fertilizer this season, though you will absolutely save that money and more. This is about recognizing that the gap between what you were told and what is actually true is wide enough to build an entirely different relationship with your land. Your great-great-grandmother grew food without a single bag of synthetic inputs, not because she was primitive, because she understood something about her soil, her weeds, and her ecosystem that a century of industrial agriculture worked very hard to make you forget. You just remembered it. If what you discovered today made you angry, good. That anger is useful. Channel it into a black bucket, 6 months of patience, and a garden that owes nothing to anyone. And if you want to be part of reclaiming this kind of knowledge rather than just consuming it, share this video with one person who still throws their weeds in the trash. Not to grow this channel, to shrink their grocery bill and their dependence on a system that has never had their interests at heart. Next week, we are going to look at something that will make today's video feel like the introduction, a fermentation technique developed by Korean natural farmers in the 1960s that produces a microbial inoculant so powerful that a single application can restructure the biological life of dead compacted soil within 30 days. The industry calls it impossible. The science calls it documented. We will call it the next thing they did not want you to find.